thank you everyone for joining us on this webinar. As the title of the first slide here suggests, we are joined by Ed Heisch with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and he will be talking a bit about the process that the state of Michigan has gone through to evaluate the potential for commercial aquaculture net pens in the Michigan waters of the Great Lakes. Ed is joined by representatives from the other quality of life organizations in the state of Michigan, whom he will introduce later in this presentation. So without further ado, Ed, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Jill. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate that everybody was willing to come together today to learn more about where we are in this process as the state of Michigan DNR considers, or state of Michigan agencies, I should say, consider the possible introduction of net pen culture in the Great Lakes. So by way of a brief introduction to what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to start with a introduction to the different types of aquaculture systems that are commonly used in Michigan. And then we're going to discuss the current status of the potential commercial net pen operations that have been proposed for the Great Lakes. We'll cover a little bit more about how the process is going to proceed and in detail what some of the next steps are that are coming up in the process. Joining me today on the call from the other quality of life agencies, Dr. Nancy Barr. Dr. Barr is a veterinarian who currently serves as the program manager for the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development's Animal Industry Division's Aquaculture, Poultry, and Swine program. From DEQ Executive Division, Dave Fiedler. Dave serves as Regulatory Affairs Officer. And most of you are probably familiar with Dr. Tammy Newcomb, Senior Water Policy Advisor for DNR Executive Division, and as Jill said, I'm Ed Heisch. I serve as the Fish Production Program Manager for DNR Fisheries Division. So the four basic types of aquaculture that we're going to discuss today include recirculating aquaculture systems, or RAS, flow-through systems, pond aquaculture, and then finally the one that we're all here to talk about, net pen or cage aquaculture. Starting with the recirculating aquaculture systems. Recirculating aquaculture systems, as the name implies, they reuse the water over and over again. The only fresh water needed for this type of rearing system is to make up for wastewater that leaves the system with waste removal or just by evaporation. They're very high-tech in design that they have such components as UV filters or maybe an ozone generation system for treating pathogens that may be present in the water. They also have to have some sort of waste removal system. It's usually some sort of a mechanical filter, either a disc filter or drum filter. And they all also have some sort of a biofilter mechanism. And a biofilter is essentially a media that has some sort of a media of some sort that has lots of surface area on it, and that surface area is basically home for nitrogen-fixing bacteria that function by taking ammonia and converting it from toxic forms to non-toxic forms. Because these systems are so high-tech in design, they tend to have pretty large upfront capital costs. Building these facilities is not cheap. And they also tend to be very maintenance intensive. They have some upsides though. They're not everything I've said so far sounds kind of negative about RAS systems, but RAS systems have the positive characteristic that they essentially have no environmental impact. Because of that, we're very supportive of recirculating aquaculture systems. They have no water leaving the system, so there's no chance for disease transmission. There's no nutrients being released into the environment, so there's no environmental impact. And on the plus side for the operators, that means that there is no NPDES permit needed if they are in fact 100% recirculating. And I'll get into that acronym NPDES. I'll get into what that means a little bit more in a future slide. Second type of design I'm going to talk about is flow-through design. Flow-through design hatcheries usually involve some sort of linear raceways. They may be of concrete in construction, or some of the older systems might be concrete walls with earthen or gravel bottoms to the raceways. Some also will use some sort of circular tanks in their design. Many of them are serial reuse in design, and by that I mean they have groups of rearing units or raceways that are grouped together and get a pass of water, and that water goes through and is reused multiple times by other groups of fish within the hatchery. All 6 of our DNR hatcheries would qualify as flow-through design, and you would also see that flow-through design is the common design in some of the larger commercial aquaculture farms in Michigan as well. Flow-through usually includes some sort of waste removal and treatment system, and that may be something as basic and simple as a quiescent or settling zone at the foot of each raceway where the waste can settle out and then periodically be removed. Or it may be something as advanced as what you'd see if you came and visited us here at Platt, where we have no quiescent zone, but instead we have filters in place at the end of every series of raceways. And the waste that's collected there is backwashed and sent to a actual waste treatment system, including a clarifier and sludge storage tank, as well as ferric chloride delivery for flocculating nutrients out of the water before it goes to a settling pond. There's a broad range of waste removal and treatment that you can see in flow-through designed hatcheries. And then the third type of culture is pond culture, also known as extensive rearing. This particular type of fish culture is commonly used in the rearing of warm water species like catfish, bass, panfish. It's fairly common in the southern states. In Michigan, it is in use to some degree. The Michigan DNR hatcheries, we use pond culture for our cool water program, so we use it for rearing of muskies, walleyes, and northern pike. And in the commercial industry in Michigan, it's also seen, but mostly in the smaller farms, the smaller commercial farms in Michigan. Pond culture has the advantage of being very low maintenance, low operational costs, and very low manpower needs, with the exception of during harvest time. I say very low. That's all relative to the other types of aquaculture. There's still work that needs to be done, but by and large, it's much lower manpower needs for pond culture. And then finally, the open water net pen or cage culture. That's what we've all come together today to talk about. Cage culture is very common in marine aquaculture systems. It's seen as far north as the northern waters of the Atlantic Ocean, and even in the Alaska area of the Pacific Ocean, where it's used in salmon ranching. And it's seen as far south as the waters off of Hawaii, where they're raising more warm water species. Cage culture is not, or net pen culture is not new to the Great Lakes. There exists a pretty solid net pen industry in the North Channel area of Lake Huron, in Ontario waters of Lake Huron. Similar to pond culture, net pen culture has a relatively low need for manpower, with the exception of somebody needing to provide feed to the fish on a daily basis, and of course at harvest time that's always going to be a high manpower time of year. One thing to be aware of with net pen culture is that they tend to be reliant, that type of culture is generally reliant on land-based farms to supply the pens with fingerlings. And that's because they don't start out fish at real small sizes in cages or net pens in these open water systems, because if they did, the mesh would have to be of such a small size to keep the fish from escaping that they would have problems with biofouling. So they generally are starting with, I'm going to say probably between 4 and 6 inch, maybe a little bit larger fingerlings in these net pens. So with that brief introduction to aquaculture in general, where's the industry headed in Michigan? The commercial aquaculture industry in Michigan is small right now, but there is a very clear desire to grow the industry. If you were to go to the Michigan Aquaculture Association's webpage, that's www.michiganaquaculture.org, you would find a link to a strategic plan titled "A Strategic Plan for a Thriving and Sustainable Michigan Aquaculture." That strategic plan was recently completed, and it does a good job of laying out the need for expansion of domestic production of seafood, not just in Michigan, but in the U.S. in general. And that plan, if you read it, you'll see that it clearly identifies cage culture or net pen culture in the Great Lakes as an option for relatively fast growth of the industry should it be permitted. So with that being said, what has been proposed so far to the quality of life agencies relative to open water net pen culture in the Great Lakes in Michigan waters? We have actually received 2 formal proposals to date. The first is from Coldwater Fisheries Incorporated. Coldwater Fisheries Incorporated operates a grouping of, I believe it's 3 net pen farms in the North Channel area of Lake Huron. And what they are proposing to do, they desire to grow their operation, and they're proposing to move their operation into the northern waters of Lake Michigan. And in particular, they have identified 2 sites in Green Bay, one each in Big Bay Denok and Little Bay Denok. Their proposal targets, at least in what they propose is their 5-year pilot period for this project. They're proposing to target 385,000 pounds of rainbow trout production annually. And the second proposal that's been brought forward is Project Rainbow. That's been brought forward by the Aquaculture Research Corporation, and that particular proposal has identified the Michigan waters of northern Lake Huron as a possible location for their operation, and there's 3 specific sites that they've identified. This project is not quite as well fleshed out as the Coldwater Fisheries proposal in that they have these 3 sites and they're not necessarily settled on any one of them just yet. And they range from, well, they're in Alpena, Rockport, and Rogers City are the areas that are being considered for Project Rainbow. Similar to Coldwater Fisheries, their desire is to produce rainbow trout. They're targeting 500,000 pounds annually for their production. So what would be required permit-wise if somebody wanted to get into for these operations that want to get into open water net pen culture in Michigan's waters of the Great Lakes? There certainly are some permitting requirements. The first permit, this one I mentioned earlier, the NPDES, or National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. This is a permit that DEQ issues under delegated authority from the U.S. EPA, and it is, as the name implies, it's aimed at limiting or eliminating pollutants from discharge from industrial or agricultural operations. And in this particular instance, where we're talking about aquaculture, the pollutant that is usually of concern is dissolved nutrients, and even more specifically, phosphorus tends to be the most often targeted pollutant for limiting or eliminating. There is a fairly extensive permit application that needs to be submitted to DEQ by the proposed operator. Once that completed permit has been received, or completed application has been received, DEQ has to respond either by issuing a permit or denying the permit within 180 days of receipt of the complete application. And I specify the complete application because the permit or application rather, is large enough that it's not uncommon for DEQ to have to go back to the applicant for further information. So once the last of that information is received, that's when they have the clock starts ticking and they have their 180 days to respond. Another permit that would be issued by DEQ would be construction permit and bottomland conveyance. The application for this is also very, very significant. In fact, I would say it's probably, from the viewpoint of the applicant, probably will be a more onerous application to complete. It's an extensive application. It covers all aspects of the operation, from things as basic as what is the very specific coordinates of the location that's being proposed, the site that's being proposed, to what sort of mesh is proposed for the cages or for the pens, how will they be anchored, to things as extensive as, a description of the existing benthic community in the area directly under and around the proposed operation. The permit is submitted concurrently to, it's a joint permit. It's submitted to both the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and DEQ at the same time, the same application. Once DEQ has received, again, a complete application, they have 150 days to respond, either by issuing the permit or denying it. Both of these permits would have some sort of a public comment period associated with them. Draft permits would be posted for public review, and in some instances there may or may not, or excuse me, there may be actual public hearings for people to have an opportunity to voice their concerns or to voice support. One thing that I want to make very clear to everybody on the call: to date, no permit applications have been received, complete or otherwise. So there is no clock running on this process at this point. So one more time, no permit applications have been received up to this point. So in response to, or in recognition, I guess, of the desire of the industry to grow within Michigan, the Quality of Life agencies formed a commercial aquaculture work group, and this work group is represented by all three agencies. For anybody that's not aware, the Quality of Life agencies include DEQ, Michigan Department of Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and DNR. And on this work group, DEQ is represented by their executive division, the Office of the Great Lakes, and Water Resources Division. MDART is represented by their executive division, their economic development division, animal industry division, and their environmental stewardship division. And finally, DNR is represented by both our executive division and our fisheries division. The work group is meeting on a pretty regular basis. We take this issue very seriously, and we want to make sure that we're moving along in as timely a fashion as we can. The primary purpose of this work group is to inform the directors of the QOL agencies so that a thoughtful and defensible science-based policy can be developed relative to net pen aquaculture in the Great Lakes. And as the group has been working, three obvious areas of focus have kind of come into focus, I guess, for us. The first is legal jurisdiction and interagency agreements. Second is economic evaluation, and the third is reviewing the science around this issue. The legal jurisdiction and interagency agreements, think of things like the binational Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. As we consider this and move forward, if it was determined that these operations were going to be permitted, we would have to, one of the things that has to be considered is that consistent with what we agreed to in the binational agreement between the U.S. and Canada. Another aspect of this area is all of the different state and provincial governments that have interest in the Great Lakes. Any state or province that has shoreline on the Great Lakes has an interest in what happens within those Great Lakes. They're all connected waterways, and what happens in Lake Superior has the potential to impact things in Lake Ontario. So all of those governmental agencies are going to want to have a voice on this, so that has to be considered. And then last but certainly not least, all of the Native American tribes that are recognized as party to the various treaties. I would refer you to the 1836 treaty and the consent agreement that we have between the tribes represented by that consent agreement and the Michigan DNR. That very clearly spells out that we co-manage the fisheries of Michigan's waters of the Great Lakes with the tribes. So they will also need to have voice in this. So there's a whole lot of moving parts that need to be considered from a legal jurisdiction and interagency aspect. Economic analysis. The basic question in this area is does the market demand exist to warrant the expansion of the commercial aquaculture industry? Very clearly, if you look at the strategic plan that I mentioned that is available on the Michigan Aquaculture Association's webpage, there's a lot of facts in there that are laid out that show pretty conclusively that domestic seafood demand far outpaces domestic production. So there's a trade imbalance there. So there's a lot of demand for seafood in the U.S., not just in the U.S. but worldwide. There are some hurdles that the industry is going to have to overcome, though, as they try and grow. There's some growing pains they're going to have to go through. The first one is it's significant. There's very tough international competition from countries like Chile, Ecuador, Norway, Sweden. These are all countries that have been hip deep in the commercial aquaculture industry for a number of years, for decades, and they have established supply chains and processing plants and systems that allow them to produce seafood at a very attractive price point. That's going to be tough for the industry to overcome. They can't. I'm not saying they can't overcome it. Certainly they can, but this is something they're going to have to deal with. And additionally, supply chain and product processing issues exist in Michigan for expansion in order for that potentially get in the way of expansion of the industry. That's a short-term thing. I think as any industry grows, it has to reach that certain tipping point where, from a supply chain standpoint, where it becomes economically attractive for suppliers and vendors to locate in an area that makes sense for that industry. Primarily, I'm thinking of fish food. Right now, there is not any fish food manufactured in the Great Lakes region, and that in order for that to happen, the industry would have to grow to a point where it is economically advantageous for a feed manufacturer to do so. And so that's another thing that the industry will have to overcome, but it's a short-term issue, and as I said, I'm confident that the industry will be able to overcome those sort of short-term stumbling blocks. And then the third thing that I mentioned, the third area of focus, is science review. As we've been working through this process as a work group, there's been several key areas of uncertainty or issues, if you will, that have kind of risen to the fore. First is the potential for environmental and ecosystem effects that could come from these cage culture operations. One thing I didn't mention as I was talking about cages is that when you think of waste management, they're really, at this point, there have been no real successful means of collecting or removing waste from net pen operations, at least in my experience. So that we question what is the impact of that if that waste is going directly into the system. Second area of uncertainty is fish health and disease. These fish that are going to be contained in an unnatural situation, they're like any hatchery is an unnatural situation for fish. So they're concentrated at higher densities than you would find them in the wild. That's a stressful condition. Stressful conditions can lead to health and disease concerns. So given that the fish in these net pens are only going to be separated from our wild populations by nothing more than a mesh that makes up these pens, how real is that concern? And then the third issue would be the effects of potential effects of fish escapement on wild populations. And when I say that, you should be thinking genetics. In particular, if there were to be an escapement event of rainbow trout, would it impact our naturally reproducing steelhead populations from a genetic standpoint? And then the potential for human health concerns. This is related to the things that I talked about on item 1, the environmental and ecosystem effects. Given that there is no good means for waste removal, that means that the waste is going directly into the Great Lakes, and there's been some question raised as to whether or not that might pose some sort of a human health concern. So that's a question that needs to be answered. And then, what things do we need to be considering relative to the siting of these net pens? There's one that jumps to mind real quick for me, and it goes right back to what I said relative to the fish escapement. How close would the proposed operation be to a naturally reproducing population of steelhead? And certainly there must be some other things that are related to that, and we need to identify what those concerns are. And then finally, are there gaps that need addressing? Are there gaps in the existing body of scientific literature related to these concerns that need to be addressed through some further research? So to get at all of these areas of uncertainty, our work group quickly came to the conclusion that our best way to do this, to develop a truly objective opinion on these questions or answers to these questions, would be to put together a Blue Ribbon Science Review panel. The mission of that panel would be to provide an objective, science-based opinion on areas of concern related to Great Lakes net pen aquaculture. And if you look at your screen right now, you'll see the roster for that Blue Ribbon panel. It's an 8-member panel. Their areas of expertise include freshwater ecology, aquaculture, lake hydrodynamics, fisheries management and ecology, fish health, wastewater engineering, and water quality. And when you look at that roster, that's a pretty impressive roster of some pretty heavy hitters in the professional world. So we're confident that we're going to get a good, objective opinion on these areas of concern. So what comes next in this process? There's going to be a excuse me. There's going to be a public meeting associated with the Science Review Panel on June 25th of this year at MSU. It's going to be in room 101 of the Diagnostics Center at MSU on campus. That'll be at 4 o'clock on June 25th. And that will be a chance for the panel to gather more information about what people are concerned about. And by no means is this going to be a meeting where the panel is going to report to the public. This is at the very early stages of their functioning as a team. So this is at the front end. At the back end, we expect to have or hope to have their report in hand by the 1st of October of this year. And in the meantime, we will continue to work as a work group to develop our and kind of shape our policy on Great Lakes commercial net pen aquaculture. But that's not going to happen until such time as the Science Review Panel's report has been completed and received, and we've had time to digest it as an agency group. We also, as they continue to do their work, we will continue to do our work in analyzing all of the legal and jurisdictional issues, and hopefully have some clarity on those areas by the time we get their report in hand. And this next point is something that's very important, and I hope everybody takes this back to those that they represent. This is not going to happen in a vacuum. There are no behind closed doors deals being made on any sort of proposed net pen operations. We absolutely have every intention of being transparent as we work through this process, and the public consultation is going to be a big part of this, and that will be to discuss the social issue. You will have the opportunity to discuss any social issues, whether you're talking about other competing issues in the Great Lakes or competing uses of the Great Lakes, think sport fishing, recreational boating, swimming, whatever. There will be ample opportunity for people to, for our stakeholders to be able to express their concerns. So before we get on to the questions, that pretty much wraps up my talk, but there's a couple of key things that I want to repeat. One, I just said, this isn't going to happen in a vacuum. You will have your opportunity for input. And the other is that I want to repeat is that no applications have been received at this point. So we are not running on or not working against a running clock at this point. We're being thoughtful and deliberate, and I guess that's the end of what I have to say. So I thank you for your attention, and at this point I will open it up to any questions that we may have.
Ed, Denny Grunhold.
Hi, Denny.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good presentation. Earlier you made the comment on the net pens that they wouldn't be raising, they wouldn't be egg up in there. So where would those fingerlings be produced from? Where would they come from, and who may do that?
That's a good question, Denny. That's going to be up to the proposed operators to find a source of fingerlings. Now, there are a couple of decent-sized operations, commercial operations already working in Michigan. I expect that they would probably look to some of those producers to buy their stock from. Now, I know that up on the operations up on the North Channel, there actually was a junket put together of folks that went out and saw their operation. I was not able to take part in that. This was a couple of years ago. And from my understanding, they actually are trucking their fish a fair distance, their fingerlings a fair distance to where the net pens are. So I'm sure that these operators would have no problem purchasing fish from our existing commercial industry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ed, Tom Rozic here.
Tom, how are you?
I'm well. How about you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Very good, succinct presentation. Is this going to be posted somewhere where we can look at it again and digest it slowly?
Actually, Jill had asked if it was okay to provide a copy of this. I think it's being recorded. Jill, is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
So it will be available right through the commission.
This is Tammy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. I hear
we
you,
will
Tammy.
also be issuing a press release, and I would like this to be posted in parallel with the press release.
Okay. One issue that popped into my head right away is cormorants. I know there's a pending lawsuit to do away with any kind of cormorant control, and these things are going to be a magnet for cormorants. Just throwing that out.
Yeah, that's true, Tom. There's certainly net predators are going to be an issue that the operators would have to deal with. I was in Finland last year looking at some of their Porogonid production facilities, and that included a net pen operation. And I believe that the net pens had some mesh over top of them to exclude avian predators.
Okay.
And I would certainly think that would be the case in the Great Lakes as well.
Ed, do we have any idea how extensive of an area, how many acres they're going to tie up?
Tom, I don't know the actual acreage off the top of my head. It's pretty limited. That's one of the advantages that I think that the industry is putting forward, is that they can produce an awful lot of high-quality protein in a fairly small, with a fairly small footprint. but I can't tell you off the top of my head. Nancy, do you have any feel for that?
No, not really.
Okay.
Ed Alhouse, got a question about cross-jurisdictional issues. A place like Bay de Noc, where Green Bay is just below it, and where obviously, currents and outflows might affect more than one state. Has Michigan talked to other states about the possibility of setting up a mechanism by which they can solve cross-jurisdictional problems regarding net pen aquaculture?
I don't believe that there has been conversation between the states or among the states at this point. Clearly, though, as we've identified, that is one of our areas of focus. That's something that has to happen before any of this can move forward.
Second question, real quick. I know this is really more pointed towards potential economic future. Right now, we have an issue in Superior that we have a herring fishery that is caviar focused, and unfortunately, the carcass industry has a lot less demand for the herring carcasses than they do the caviar overseas. Would that be something that for future utilization as fish food and net pen aquaculture might be looked at? Would that be a source, a potential source?
It's certainly possible. Generally speaking, though, the commercial aquaculture industry is leaning much more heavily towards plant-based protein sources for their feeds. So soybeans, I guess, generally is the source that a lot of the commercial aquaculture feeds are using for their protein. So, but that's not to rule out. I mean, certainly if there are carcasses available that aren't being used, I would sure think they would be looking for a way to market those.
Thank you.
Ed Ray Underwood.
Yes.
I think we have to be concerned, having had some experience with offshore net culture in the Pacific. These things are very poorly marked in general, as most commercial nets are poorly marked in the average traveling boater is pretty much unaware of netting requirements that are pretty much for commercial netters generally. But I think that at some point in time that we have to start using a different pattern or different colors, particularly with traveling boaters who may not be familiar with an area, and in this case would probably be pretty much a lot of traveling boaters. So I think we need to take a look at what kind of colors and what kind of netting warnings are there going to be in place.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And clearly navigational issues are something that are going to have to be considered as this if these proposals move forward. And I would certainly think that would be something that the Army Corps would comment on. And I will say this: it's absolutely in the best interest of the operators to mark them well. If they have an accident where somebody accidentally hits one of their net pens, they're going to lose fish, and that's dollars that they lose. So it's clearly in their best interest to do that. So I would certainly expect that they would be open to that idea.
Thank you.
Ed, this is Tom Lauer. You mentioned the rainbow trout. Do you have any other idea of other species that may be potentially grown in the Great Lakes, whether it be yellow perch or some corygonids or anything else? Have you heard any question about other species?
There's been a little bit of talk of other species. I don't know where the industry is going to want to go with this. I would expect that there will be some, if this industry does come to this branch of the industry does come to be, I would expect that they might look at, who knows, whitefish maybe, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear some talk about Atlantic salmon at some point as well.
Great,
but that'll be up to the industry to decide what direction they want to go, and that will in large part be based on what the market is asking for.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah. Hi, Ed Alhouse. Real quick question. You mentioned Atlantic salmon. I know there's a huge issue in the Chilean fjords with fugitive Atlantic salmon as well as steelhead that have escaped from the pens down there. Is there any thought of requiring sterilization of the fish that are raised within these pens?
Certainly that is something that has been talked about among our work group. You know, whether or not in the end it would be an actual hard and fast requirement for triploid fish, I can't answer that at this point until things develop a little bit further, but it absolutely is something that we're giving concern or giving thought to. You know, as far as from my professional perspective, the concerns about potential impacts on existing naturally reproducing populations are much less if the industry tells me and proves to me that they're going to be using triploid fish. Okay, does anybody have any other questions, any concerns? Okay, with that, I thank you for your time. I probably should have put my email information up there in case anybody had any, or my contact information if anybody wanted to follow up with anything. My email address is eische@michigan.gov. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions, or my phone number, if you prefer to call, is 231-325-4611, extension 14. I apologize for not putting that on a slide and having it up there for you.
Ed, would you give us that email address again, please?
Sure. It's eische@michigan.gov.
eishe@michigan.gov. Thank you.
No, eische.
Phonetically, could you give me that, please?
Sure, that's E as in Edward, I as in India, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie, H as in Hotel, E as in Ed, @michigan.gov.
eische. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you very much, Ed. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Call
Ed.
me,
Good job.
Yeah. Thanks again, Ed, on behalf of the entire committee. We really appreciate this. For folks on the line, I will I'll make this recording available as soon as possible, as well as the slides. And if you guys have any questions in the meantime, you can feel free to reach out to me as well. And I can also send around Ed's contact information, those that didn't get it. Okay.
All right.
I think we're all set then. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.